If you listen to the show, you already know that we cannot exist without our sponsors. They are the ones who make things happen behind the scenes. So let's acknowledge Fuji Sports. We've been working with these guys for a while now, not only as far as this podcast is concerned, but also at the RŌL Academy. We've had their gear. I personally use their gis. What a phenomenal product.
Yeah, I mean, jiu-jitsu, judo, MMA, tape, bags, anything you need for your jiu-jitsu journey, you can find at fujisports.com.
Let's talk RŌL TV. There's so much content on there. It's ridiculous at this point. But I think what is even more intriguing, as time went on during the project, we've been recording most of the events that were taking place here at RŌL Academy. At this point, I mean, we have guys like Chris Howder, Armin Fati, Rafael Lovato Sr., and Pete the Greek. I mean, there are so many different events that we've kind of recorded it. Don't you think that's amazing? I mean, points of reflection and kind of going back for all the students to see what really happened and refresh their memory.
Yeah, I think it's great, you know, being able to go back and look at all these high-level practitioners, Octavio Cudo, like one of the names you didn't mention. And I mean, just these guys that have been doing this for so long come in, teach these amazing seminars and workshops, and it's all recorded and there for you to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to get additional savings on all this, type in code RŌL Radio at the coupon and get additional 30% off of your membership.
Nice. Go to rolacademy.tv. What's up, everyone, and welcome back. If you haven't already, please hit the like, share, subscribe, download, listen, and whatever other button there is, and leave us a review wherever you do listen. This ensures that we can continue bringing you the great guests and amazing content you have come to expect. Today's guest joins us to discuss how online education has revolutionized learning, how cultural influences impact fighting styles, and his hourglass theory of jiu-jitsu. Here is the RŌL Radio with the operator of grapplearts.com, host of the Strenuous Life BJJ Podcast, and the author of The Roadmap for BJJ, Stephan Kesting.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we are live. Once again, another episode. Today, I'm really excited. We have a unique opportunity to speak with, I believe, a pioneer, Stephan Kesting. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spending some time with me chatting here. But I think of you as one of the pioneers of online education. And I wonder, how do you process this phrase? How do you feel about this?
I think first of all, thank you very much for having me on, and thank you to anyone who's listening. I hope I can bring some value here today. When you say online education, I mean, that really is a thing. And to people who are younger than, 20, 25 years old, this has kind of been their default mode for as long as they can remember. And it's only increasing. I mean, you and I are meeting virtually. We're meeting something a bit like Zoom. And this is the way the world is going, but it wasn't always this way. And I would say that the VHS tape really was the revolution. Because prior to VHS and home video recording, you could make movies. You could make Super 8 movies, but the budget for distribution was much, much, much greater, and the barriers to entry were much greater. And what you're going to shoot a jiu-jitsu instructional and on movie film and then mail that to people, that's highly unlikely. I'm old enough to remember when you used to go to the library and you used to rent one of the big movie projectors and you used to bring home movies that you would rent and you'd set it up. I had a couple of birthday parties like that when I was young. My mom went through, and I remember like Laurel and Hardy playing on black and white video. I'm old. But there's a great barrier to entry. So with the VHS cassette, where anybody could film, I think that really changed things. My first instructional, if you will, was filmed in a friend of mine's rec room of his condo. And he had gotten one of these great big VHS cameras, where you take the whole cassette and you slam it on the side.
Oh, yeah. They were like at least 20 pounds each. Like,
oh, yeah.
I mean, the whole thing, it was a big deal. Yeah.
Now you get like 12K cameras that are 1/3 the size. And it wasn't for distribution, but I'd been thinking about different ways to attack the turtle position. And the basic idea was if the guy's turtled, you have the space ahead of the hands, behind the hands, and above the legs, and then behind the legs. And so where you put your arms, where you put your legs, where you put your knees, it opened up different doors. And I thought this was kind of cool. So I filmed it, and it was super gonzo, and I mailed it out to a few friends of mine, including some people I'd met in the early online forum. And the feedback from that was pretty good. I mean, I didn't sell it, and I wish I could find that footage. That'd be kind of cool to release on YouTube. The very first super low budge grapple art instructional.
I mean, today, if you look at all of this today, do you think that we could coexist without a digital version of jiu-jitsu? Like, do you think that we could exist if, let's just hypothetically say, go crazy here, internet shuts down today, and do you think we can actually train efficiently, or would that have a big impact?
Not efficiently. I mean, this martial arts knowledge was has been disseminated for thousands of years. 2,000 years ago in Japan, 800 years ago in Japan, if you wanted to learn a secret method of sword fighting, you'd go and you'd train that secret method of sword fighting. So information was still disseminated. Then as time moved on, and there are sword texts from the Middle Ages talking about how to, kill somebody more efficiently with a sword or with a lance or with a spear. But those were very expensive to produce, and they would end up in some rich baron's private library. But that is dissemination of information. And then as time goes on, now we end up with books. I mean, I've got thousands of books in my house. So the whole shelf is jiu-jitsu books, not even martial art books, mostly. And I've got more elsewhere.
Yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're not, I encourage you to watch this on YouTube. The library that's right next to him, it's quite impressive. I mean, many have a collection of DVDs, and I assume this is as a fraction of what your total collection is, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But behind these DVDs are all the books.
Yeah.
And I'm emotionally attached to them because for years, you could learn martial arts from your instructor. You could learn it maybe if you had a friend who trained at a different school. And after that, there were books and magazines. And that was it. Now, the amount of bullshit in those books and magazines was stupendous, and I kind of enjoy finding some of those really old books. One of my most successful YouTube videos ever was about ridiculous martial art technique that would never, ever work. Somebody swings a bat at you, and you use an outside block, and then you grab the bat, and you break the bat in half with an inside block, and then you spin around, and you hit them in the face with a broken end. And that was actually in a book. Dr. Ted Gambarella's Weapons of the Street. And you're reading this as a teenager, you're going, could this work? I don't know, but these karate guys, they're amazing. So my point is there was dissemination of information.
But I don't think you're talking about 800 years ago in Japan, but I don't think it's that far back. Like if you look at jiu-jitsu 20 years ago, even 30 years ago, it's a very similar situation. Like I know when I was starting, there was no videos.
There were magazines.
Magazines. Black Belt magazine was there. There were a couple books out there, but that's about it. Yeah. Like today, I feel students, and I mean this genuinely, but I mean this in a positive way. But I think we are spoiled in a sense. Like the access information is so large. Even this conversation, it's like you can go on various platforms and listen to conversations, watch instructionals from anybody you like. And a lot of it's even free. So are we spoiled?
100%. I mean, my point about going from word of mouth to like books that only a few nobles could afford, to books that pretty much everybody could afford, to magazines that would come out every month, to then VHS tapes, it's this exponential curve of accessibility. And it's so much more accessible now. I mean, now we're ending up in situations where for example, at the CJI, Joseph Chen did amazing, and he's done amazing in competition. And one of his biggest influences is somebody with whom I've done a lot of collaboration, Rob Bernacki.
Or Bernacki,
Especially his FYJJ, Fuck Your Jiu-Jitsu training approach. And we've got Joseph Chen. I opened Instagram today, and Joseph Chen is thanking Rob Bernacki for being a huge influence on him. As far as I know, they haven't met. I think they'll meet this summer or in this fall. But I don't think they've ever met. And he's got this huge influence. And I just, somebody who, I was just talking this morning with somebody, a good friend of mine now, who back in the day started training jiu-jitsu, was getting smashed. This is back when you would just be released to the wolves. There were no beginner classes. There were no intro things. And you just go and you get smashed. And he went and bought the instructional that I did with Emily Kwok, the How to Beat the Bigger, Stronger Opponent, Volume 1. And then he ended up buying instructional after instructional, and he's been training essentially as a Ronin. Like, he calls himself homeschooled. He's got a gym that he trains at. He invites people in. And he's getting his black belt from Emily Kwok in October. So he has essentially, I mean, of course, he's gone and trained, and he's gone and competed, and he's done open mats. But this method of learning, where whether it's VHS or DVD or online streaming or app-based instruction, really has changed the game, as has just YouTube. If I guarantee that the day after CJI, people were on the 5 minutes after CJI, people were on the mats trying to recreate what they had just seen Levi do, what they had just seen one of the Tackets do. And that kind of having that, imagine how fast samurai warfare would have developed if every battle and every duel was filmed and available for free to every samurai in Japan. Oh, wait a second. I really shouldn't hold the sword like this. Or this guy's really, really good at the, I don't know what it is, the rising, the swallow splits the waters sword stroke. It would really change a game, because then the next time that guy went out with his one special move, everybody would already know it. It's unthinkable how much it changed.
Was that the objective of yours behind Grapple Arts? I mean, or even creating in some of those instructionals to create the exposure and allow the diversity of your viewer to begin growing and really changing our mind about how we can learn jiu-jitsu?
That would be a very nice story to tell, but I wasn't the first person to release online instructional. It was the big juggernaut in the room was Panther Production back in the day, or World Martial Arts. They'd released these instructionals with Mario Sperry, and then they also had a whole bunch of review sites that would review their instructionals.
Their own instructional, yeah.
Their own instructional, yeah. And so there's a meme of like, crack, out of the park, because every instructional they objectively reviewed would be a crack, out of the park, 11 out of 10 stars, whatever. So no, I don't think there was a big picture initially. I just had an area that I was really good at for the time. I've got it here somewhere. The original omoplata and the dynamic guard. You can look it up. And that was just, I felt that when you're coming up, it's very common for people to be a black belt in one area and a blue belt in the other. You might be a black belt in escapes and a blue belt in arm bars. You might be a black belt in the knee bar, which is something I got good at very early, and a blue belt in spider guard. And the omoplata and the knee bar were two things that I developed pretty quickly, I think, because of my exposure to people like Oleg Kakarov and Sambo with the knee bar. And then, strangely, Indonesian martial arts through Danny Nosanto, which has a lot of omoplata type movements in it. And so I was evolving in isolation. This is actually a good illustration of what we're talking about. I learned the omoplata in Indonesian silat, and I started wondering, I wonder if I could use it in that jiu-jitsu stuff that I'm doing. and I figured out ways to use it. And I thought I really had something. I thought I had cracked the code to something completely new. And then I got some bootleg video of a competition in Brazil. I wanted to say the Brasileiro, but I'm not sure. And guys were using the omoplata all the time. It's like, ugh.
Oh, there goes my plan.
But yeah, with with the help of some friends who were like, well, it doesn't matter if you're not the first person to do it. Can you teach it? And I think maybe initially that was my competitive advantage of having an understanding of pedagogy or how to teach something, as opposed to back in the day it was like 1, do this, 2, do that, 3, do that, boom, done, he tapped. Let's do it again with more detail, and then just show the whole thing again. Trying to show some of the underlying principles, and trying to show some of the reason why, and trying to show from different angles. Here's what it would look like. It was revolutionary at the time. Here's what it would look like if there was nobody on top of you. I mean, that's a pretty common teaching gambit now, but it wasn't. The pedagogy, especially of the first generation Brazilians coming to North America, was good for the time, but pretty poor compared to today's pedagogy.
Before we start digging into methods of teaching and how they have changed over decades at this point, let's talk about how all of this started for you. You have experience in many different martial arts. You mentioned some of them so far.
Yep.
It appears as martial arts in general played significant role in your life from the beginning. Would that be a true statement?
Sure. I think it's one of the several great passions.
When did this all start? Do you remember beginning? And I'm not even referring to jiu-jitsu itself, but like at which point was that introduction to martial art, the fascination with it?
Almost as early. I've got a letter that I wrote to my mom at age 9, basically threatening to go on strike unless I could train judo. And the judo was already a compromise because I was pretty sure she wouldn't let me train karate or jiu-jitsu, which at the time would have been Japanese jiu-jitsu, or especially ninjutsu. And there were no ninjutsu instructors in town, at least none that I could find. So
wait a minute.
Was already a compromise.
Wait a minute. You must have been very serious about this. You gave your mom a written warning that you're going to go on a strike.
Yeah.
What was the response? Now I'm curious.
Very, very intimidating. And so I could play amateur psychologist with myself as to why I wanted to do that. I guess I was bullied a fair bit as a kid. I mean, English is actually not my first language. When I was raised, I went into school not speaking in English. I learned German as a kid, even though I grew up in Canada, an English-speaking country, and French. Sorry, before I get angry. Spam. It's also French. But, yeah, so a kid with a bit of a temper who speaks strangely. At that point, I was, a target-rich environment for the bullies to pick on. So maybe that was it, or maybe, in the 70s and 80s, there was this Oriental fixation, right? We saw it a little bit with the TV show Shogun. Did you see the remake?
Oh yeah,
Shogun?
Phenomenal. Yeah, I loved it.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started rereading the book. I probably read it 3 or 4 times I think I might have read it at age 12 the first time. And I was just struck with this romanticization of everything Japanese. It's a culture where honor is everything. And, the path between life and death is clear. All you need to do is die. And that was a very sexy narrative in the 70s and 80s. And so maybe it was that. I mean, there was a fascination with anything Japanese, anything Chinese, and by definition has to be better than what we do. Karate, of course, has to be better than boxing. Judo, of course, has to be better than wrestling. And now I think we have a bit more nuanced view. Like there are aspects that judo is really good at, and there are things that wrestling is really good at. No serious MMA guy would only train karate. They would also train, Lyoto Machida also trains Muay Thai.
Yeah.
Lyoto Machida also uses boxing training methods. the karate is its base, or was its base, but it's also a branding thing that set himself apart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So at which point do you get introduced to jiu-jitsu? When do you stumble upon that?
Well, which jiu-jitsu?
Well, yeah, that's the part of the story, right? Yeah.
Arguably, judo is a form of jiu-jitsu.
Absolutely.
And arguably, Brazilian jiu-jitsu is a form of judo. Robert Drysdale has done a really good job of breaking that down and explaining that there's classical Japanese jiu-jitsu, and there are hundreds of systems. I've been exposed to Tenjin Shinryu and a couple others. And I was exposed to that in the context of Kajikembo Karate when I was in my late teens, training with Philip Jelena in Montreal. That was one of the systems that went into it. And then meeting a couple of classical Japanese jiu-jitsu instructors. So one useful thing here is to think of a martial art as not just the techniques, but also the training method and also the tools that you use to train them, kind of the training environment. Boxing would look very different if you didn't have gloves.
Mm-hmm.
Judo would look very different if we did it on concrete as opposed to a sprung matted floor. Original jiu-jitsu with the gi looks quite different from the no-gi that's developed now. But you couldn't, the rule set notwithstanding, if you threw a gi onto people in Abu Dhabi or at CJI or at any high-level no-gi competition, it's the exact same set of rules, but you got to wear the gi and these pants, it would look quite different.
Absolutely.
So there's the techniques, the training method, and kind of the training environment or the training tools. And the biggest difference between the classical Japanese jiu-jitsu system and the modern jiu-jitsu systems is the training method, the live sparring and I'm sure they did do some live sparring back in the day, but how it was often taught in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even now is cooperative.
Elaborate on that a little bit more. I think a lot of people are not, I mean, if everybody who even has been training jiu-jitsu for a while today might not be familiar with this looked like even 30, 40, 50, let alone 50 or 60 years ago, right? What are the biggest differences between the traditional jiu-jitsu that you speak about right now versus what we see today?
So the traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu systems, there's many different organizational sets or ways to organize it, but typically there'd be, okay, Series 1, and here are the 10 techniques that are in Series 1, and they're all belt grab defense. So, technique 1, I'm going to reach forward and grab your belt. Before I grab your belt, you're going to deflect it, you're going to hit me in the throat, you're going to get a grip on my neck, you're going to throw me to the ground, and you're going to put me in an arm lock. But we would practice this over and over, and you would always do the same thing, and I would always do the same thing. So you would be practicing it, but there wouldn't be any resistance on my part.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still many classical martial arts that are still trained this way. Oh, yes, we train the applications of these movements, but we always do it cooperatively. Or maybe I add a little bit of resistance, but I let you win. Because otherwise it makes the martial art look a bit foolish, doesn't it? I tried technique number 1 from scroll number 1, and it didn't work. I think that was the standard. That was if you were lucky enough to be able to train application, because there was an entire generation, especially of Chinese kung fu practitioners, they'd just be doing their forms, right? Okay, time to do the tiger crane form again and again. Okay, now we're going to hold each stance in the tiger crane form, a couple hundred moves long, where you're prancing around in empty space by yourself, pretending to be a tiger, pretending to block punches, pretending to kick, and then doing weird movements that you don't know what they are, but they're part of the form. That was the majority of training for a lot of people. Or working on a wooden dummy, doing a specific sequence of moves on a wooden dummy, not even on a human being. Then, if you were lucky, you were shown the applications. And in the Kung Fu school I trained at, once a year we would spar. We put on like very heavy chest protectors, heavy helmets, big gloves, and we just go out there and maul each other. without knowing what we were doing, really. And it's amazing how quickly your Tiger Crane form and these deep stances would evolve into something that looked kind of like bad kickboxing. You figure out, okay, I should keep my hands up here. I shouldn't be, posturing out like that. And you figure out, okay, I probably shouldn't be trying to punch him in the knee by sliding down. I should probably be throwing something that looked a bit like a jab and a bit like a cross and a bit like an uppercut. And we were doing it very poorly. But the fact that we were sparring it live meant that it was very rapidly evolving away from the pure form of it. So training with resistance changes everything.
Certainly does. And that's, is that the big pivot in evolution, with that live sparring or live challenges starting to getting introduced, and we were kind of walking away slowly from that very, for lack of a better term, cookie cutter approach to repetition training?
I think so. Live sparring has definitely been part of different martial arts throughout history. They have to have been, right? I mean, the Mongols practiced wrestling. I think they practiced wrestling because it's a fairly easy way for you and me to get in each other's faces and feel aggression and feel pressure without actually bludgeoning each other to death with blunt weapons. I'm sure they did some of that as well. So there has been live training, and I'm sure the Japanese and the Chinese systems had live training at some point in their history. What the rules were around that, I don't know. Did they have some form of gloves? I don't know. Did they do chest only or neck down contact?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm sure it varied. I'm just talking about the martial arts scene in North America in the 20th century, with the exception of judo. I mean, judo was doing randori right from the start.
Wouldn't you agree that judo is one of those martial arts that truly preserved that almost original approach between the early days to even today? I mean, that is behind the rule changes that are introduced, especially on an Olympic level. But as far as the art is concerned, the preservation of the original, it's pretty close, isn't it?
I think so. I gripe and moan about the rules changes because when I did judo, all of the attacks I was good at are now illegal.
Yeah.
Which really means I had an ugly judo at the time that I did it, and really it was all centered around somehow getting the match to the ground.
Yeah.
Because in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. I wasn't even a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. I had just done enough grappling that when I finally hit judo, and I trained at a club that did a fair amount of newaza or groundwork, just the fact that I had spent lots of time trying to reverse engineer Gracie in action challenge matches and rolling around on the ground meant that I had an advantage. And I was young and fit, but so were some of those judo guys. So, yeah, I mean, judo has evolved, and I think there's an argument that the International Judo Federation is trying to maintain their image of what beautiful judo should look like. So as I don't know, as the wrestlers come in, they're like, okay, no more leg grabs, because that's not our image of beautiful classical judo. And then the Russians came in, and they started doing these crazy pickup throws and flying arm bars. Okay, that's not our image of beautiful judo. So they're really trying to micromanage their sport in a way that grappling, for the most part, doesn't. Like if somebody figures out a way to just absolutely smash the most flexible of guards, and that becomes the meta, then that'll be the next CJI. That'll be the next ADTP. Just everybody using, I'm making this up, the reverse cartwheel guard pass, because it's just so effective against super flexible guard players.
But that's part of the beautiful part about jiu-jitsu, right? Is that one, the rule sets vary between different organizations. Creates this diversity, almost never-ending combination. Two, we train without these limitations, versus when you compare even to wrestling. I mean, I think wrestling has a limitation because it is a more sport-like, right? Which means there are engagement within the rules. And jiu-jitsu is a little bit more fluid. There's more room for interpretation. There's a little bit more trial and error in a sense. There's less of right and wrong, right? And that creates this rainbow in a way of what we can and should do.
I agree with a caveat.
Yes.
When I started jiu-jitsu, we would spend 80% of our time training in the gi.
Mm-hmm.
This is, training with Marcus Suarez, a black belt under Carlson Gracie, straight out of Brazil. Almost all our training was done in the gi. But we were all super interested in MMA. And even if we weren't fighting, our training partners were fighting. And so we would also spend time doing MMA. And then once in a while, mostly to prepare for MMA, but then as ADC started getting more popular, we'd take off the gi and we'd roll no gi. So there was kind of an expectation, at least in my circle, that you would be good at all three things. And we'd sometimes worry about self-defense too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with the proliferation of rule sets, you've got three different specializations: MMA, gi, and no gi. And within no gi, well, are you training by EBI rules? So
right.
You better spend a lot of time on your armbar escapes and your rear mount escapes. Like that better be, and your stalling. You better be really good at stalling, really good at escaping the armbar, and really good at escaping the back. If you were an ADCC specialist, you better get good at wrestling, and pretending to wrestle, and spend 3 hours a day working on clubbing somebody down. We're definitely not striking.
But at the same time, this is what creates this, diversity of event. This is what makes it entertaining.
Yeah.
This is what. Wouldn't you agree that these situations, love them or hate them, but this is what allows us to grow with the rapid rate that it's growing?
Yes, and eventually they're going to be different. Like it's I don't know. It's funny how martial arts instructors always talk about loyalty. But every single martial art out there was fissured off from some other martial art. So by definition,
there's no loyalty.
Yeah, many times. So the fact that you're training martial art, you're training Fukian White Crane as opposed to Wing Chun, at some point somebody slid off from the other lineage and goes, no, everyone's doing it wrong. And then they split off again. So there's a long line of betrayals behind every instructor who's now preaching loyalty. Similarly, I think we're going to end up in a situation where people train in the gi and people train no gi, and that never the twain shall meet, and they'll almost be considered different sports. And I think people training in the gi are a little bit interested in training without the gi, but there's lots of no gi people who could not give a crap as to.
Wouldn't you agree that we're already there?
I think the thing that keeps the two sports together is the fact that many instructors go, man, I like to have a no-gi class and I like to have a gi class.
Yeah. But just the fact that we do have some organizations that prefer, or organizations or academies or affiliations, whatever, that prefer one versus the other. And there are systems designed purely for one or the other. Now, having the fact that we have IBJJ, FCGI, ADCC, these are almost different sports if you think about it. Like different rule sets, the environment is different, the length of the match is different, and absolutely, right. So like I feel like we're already there. We might be in denial, I feel, to acknowledge the fact that this is happening in front of us, but I feel like it's already slowly unfolding and going in that direction.
Yeah. So that there's a ton of diversity within grappling that wasn't there years ago. I remember Brazilian instructors who would occasionally fight MMA. To prepare for their MMA fight, they would take off their gi and just roll in the t-shirt. Without gloves, without punching. But that was their MMA preparation. I don't think that would fly anymore.
I mean, I even remember like watching the earlier UFCs where the interviews were taking place with the fighters and like, what's your preparation camp? And they're like, no, I'm training with the gi. This is what I'm doing. Like, jiu-jitsu is the king and nothing. I think we have grown since then.
Yeah.
Haven't we?
I would agree. I would agree. I mean, I still like doing both, although for the last 2 years, I've mostly been doing no gi. I find it somewhat friendlier on injuries, and certainly friendlier on fingers. But I think it's important to do some gi. I mean, originally, like, a martial art means being able to fight, and only most of the people that you might get in a fight with are going to be wearing some form of clothing that you can use against them, unless you really ended up in the wrong part of town.
So we talked about a lot of historical events. We talked about the overlapping items between different styles. We briefly talked about your beginnings. At some point, you continue growing and dipping into this jiu-jitsu, and you're going through the ranks of jiu-jitsu. At which point in your life or in this journey, you begin to realize that this jiu-jitsu is bigger than what it used to be? Like, at which point is this pivot point where you're starting to see, like, this is actually a big deal in comparison to the other forms or styles that you have been exposed to?
When you start seeing it show up in more places. I mean, in addition to doing jiu-jitsu, I'm also a firefighter.
Mm-hmm.
I was the very first firefighter in my department to do jiu-jitsu, and it was viewed as kind of weird. That guy kind of rolls around on the ground, and a couple people would take runs at you, and okay, well, let's put out the mats or go out on the grass, and we'd have a little clash of egos, and it was effective. And jiu-jitsu works, especially against untrained opponents. And now, then 5 years later, like, holy shit, the other guy also does it. And now there's 20 or 30 people who've done it, who do it actively, and maybe a bunch of people who did it got really high level and then quit. So it starts to become more popular, but you also start seeing it in movies. Like, a more recent example. I think John Wick just did an Imanari role.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I've talked in the past about seeing a couple of homeless guys in downtown Vancouver fighting, and one of them locked on the guillotine and then jumped to his back to pull closed guard, and then it got broken up by the cop. But that's a specific move that I don't think.
But then you start wondering, like, where did he get that from?
Yeah. I think it percolates through culture.
Yeah.
There are sort of culturally approved norms of fighting. Some cultures are knife cultures. For example, Indonesia, I'm told, I've never been to Indonesia, but from everybody I've talked to, like, you're not going to get into fisticuffs. Everyone's got a knife, or you should at least expect a knife. There are gun cultures. There are cultures where this idea of one-on-one combat is ridiculous. If your buddy's in a fight, of course you're going to pile on, and then you end up in a 5-on-1 situation. There are cultures where, Thomas and Stephan have beef. They're going to go outside, and probably nobody's going to interrupt. Right? Yeah. It's more of an honor culture kind of thing. So you start seeing the percolation. So there are cultural constraints that limit what people do in fights. It's pretty rare now to hear about somebody eye gouging somebody's eye out, or biting their nose off, or biting their ear off. But as I've talked about with Daniele Bolelli on my own podcast, there was something called rough and tumble fighting in the Americas in the early 1800s, where that was the norm. There were expert eye gougers. There were expert in the movie Gangs of New York.
Oh, yeah.
Butcher, the guy played by Daniel Day-Lewis. He was a renowned scrapper in this method in terms of, like, biting and eye gouging. And so that was the cultural norm then. So there's a big control of how culture exerts a big control in how we fight. And I think the percolation of MMA and jiu-jitsu through the culture has changed how we fight and what we should expect. A great example from a few years ago, there was a rugby game, and the footage made the rounds on Reddit, where at some point, I don't play rugby, there's a big scrum, but one guy rolls underneath in kind of an ashigarami to heel hook entry and absolutely deliberately just reefs on the leg. Totally outside the rules of rugby. I think there were ramifications for him. I didn't get out. Actually make a good newsletter email talk about this event. But it was the percolation of leg lock entries and leg lock finishes into rugby. The guy was trying to cheat doing that. So I think once you start seeing that, I don't think there was any one moment when I said, "Oh, this is going to be big." It just kept on getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Do you feel like this is becoming part of the culture that
so.
we are experiencing?
To the extent that there is one culture, I think we are fragmenting as a culture, and that the internet provides for that, right? You can be very, very siloed and think that everybody in the world believes the same thing that you believe, or anybody reputable believes the same thing that you believe. So there is a siloing of culture. It may be harder to say that there is one culture, but if you go as like a percentage of people who know what if I say guillotine choke now, a very large percentage of people would roughly be able to show you what it means. You might not be able to do it well, but they'd be able to show you. Whereas in the 1950s, if I'd gone down the street and say, "Show me a rising block, show me a reverse punch, show me harai goshi," from the dominant martial arts at the time, karate and judo, one person in 100, maybe one person in 200. I bet a lot of people would be able to. If I said ground and pound, most people would have a rough idea of what that means. So I don't think there is one culture anymore, but I do think that the knowledge
popularity,
is popularity, and even just awareness of it. It's almost in every movie, right? That's part of the appeal of the John Wick's pretty cool. The parts that really make me get excited is when it's like a flying armbar into some kind of ludicrous.
It's unreal. It really wouldn't work, but it's still extremely entertaining, and it's kind of satisfying when you do jiu-jitsu for so many years and you see it in a movie, isn't it?
No, it must be true. It
must be true.
It must be true. It must work.
So, all of this is unfolding and you going through this jiu-jitsu journey, and then the idea surfaces about start recording those videos. And now fast forward all these years, even to this moment when we're having this conversation, have you ever reflected on the impact this innocent project of recording yourself doing jiu-jitsu and perhaps dissecting and verbalizing your own perspective? How many people that has impacted? I mean, I don't know, but I would assume it's in hundreds of thousands, if not more.
I think that's probably fair. Now, the question is relative impact, right? Again, back in the day, it was easy to quantify the impact. If you had a martial arts practitioner, you could say 95% of what this guy knows came from one instructor. Whereas now, if you go to a jiu-jitsu practitioner, their instructor is important, but most of them are also watching YouTube. Many of them have bought instructional. Many of them have bought apps because they want to win. They want to not necessarily win competition. They just want to do okay in sparring against that guy. That new purple belt, and I'm a 4-stripe blue belt, and I really want to take him down. Or I'm a white belt, 2 stripes, and I'm getting crushed by a white belt, slightly heavier white belt, same rank. What do I do? So I think influencers, if you want to call me that, have a wider, but perhaps shallower impact, because there's so many other people also impacting their training in a way that wasn't really possible with the internet. I would say, though,
I gotta
I've
tell you,
impacted I think hundreds of thousands is probably correct. I mean, I get a fair amount of feedback every day from people who have been helped by what I've written, what I've said, what I've shown, and that's very gratifying. It's a little bit seductive.
I feel like you're being very humble on that topic. I remember your presence online way in the beginning when I was starting. I mean, couple decades ago. Like it you know, and everything that you're saying is true. There's many others doing it, but I kind of think that you were one of the first ones, and you were one of the ones who, whether that number one credit is important or not, doesn't really matter in my opinion. But you kind of started this whole thing about recording it, having a website, and logging in and watching things and sending things out to people, and really, not even in a monetary way, but spreading the word of jiu-jitsu in a sense. I feel like you pioneered some of this. Don't you think?
It's funny when you hear terms that that you use, like as you're desperately grasping for words to try and explain something.
Yeah.
And you just put it out there, and then 5 years later you hear somebody else talking about it. Trigger position, for example. That's the term that I came up with to describe the most obvious thing that would trigger the next move. For example, if I'm in your closed guard and I put my elbow across your chest, there's lots of things you could do, but the most obvious thing is an arm bar, and that's, if you can move me into the trigger position or I make a mistake and give it to you, you're going to go for that. So that helped explain it in my own mind, and that helped explain to other people. And then 5 years later, you hear somebody who you don't think that you have any direct connection to them using it, and they're using it. So yeah, you contribute a little bit to the overall development of the field. I'm sure that some of the terminology I use, I've assimilated and from other people. The example is what I thought was my own idea, the Hourglass Concept, right? If you've got a technique, whether that's the butterfly sweep or the arm bar, you've got all the ways to get into that core technique. You've got all the setups, and you've got all the things that the other guy might do that you're going to react to, force into the butterfly sweep. Then the narrow part of the hourglass is the butterfly sweep. But then, depending on what he does and how it works for you, you might end up completing the butterfly sweep. You might do the butterfly sweep into the mount. You might do the butterfly sweep into the side control. The guy might post, in which case he might go to the X guard. The whole thing might go to hell, and you end up in a folding pass situation. And so that's a wide bottom of the hourglass where things come out. So I thought this was my concept, and I still think it's my concept. But John Will in Australia, a very famous black belt.
Oh yeah, we've had him on a podcast. Yeah.
Great guy, fantastic guy. He's also using that term around the time, and I honestly don't know if I got it from him and just it went in kind of subconsciously and came out, or if we were just both grasping the same analogy. So there's this weird process. When you're exposed to that many influences in a day, it's hard to keep track of your mind, of where you get your ideas, and your mind tells you all kinds of stories. My mind tells me that I invented that. Is it true? Yeah, well, you are the easiest person to fool, and
that is true.
So I'll go with 60% chance that I invented it, 40% chance that I stole it from John Will and thought it was my own. I don't know.
As long as we keep swaying it in a positive, that's all really matters, right? Was there a point in your journey and in creating this online exposure where you sat back end of the day and you're like, wow, this is not what I expected. This is way bigger than I thought. Like, I didn't expect for this to grow to what it is today. Was there a big pivot point, or you really truly sit back and just allow it to happen naturally?
Yeah, I don't think there's any one point. When I look back, it's quite amazing, the journey. I'm grateful for everyone who's helped on it, and that includes people who bought my things or signed up for my emails or given a thumbs up on a video even. I don't think there was any one point where I think I made it, and in part that would be because as soon as you think you've made it, you're not pushing anymore. So, I don't. It's not a finished process to be part of jiu-jitsu and then to be part of the jiu-jitsu influencer community. It's an ongoing thing, right? It's impossible to have reached this goal because the damn sport keeps on changing. Just when you thought you had it all worked out, like, oh, okay, maybe I should try to figure out more about K-guard or whatever the meta of the day is. Especially as a competitor, you almost have the luxury to go, okay, no, that's not part of my game. I need to know how to counter it, but I'm going to focus on my A game. As an influencer / instructor, you have two choices. One is to retreat to your prime, kind of like the peak in high school phenomenon. Here's what I came up with, and this is when jiu-jitsu was great. Back when I was a brown belt, that was the peak of jiu-jitsu, and I'm just going to keep on showing that stuff. Or you can embrace the ride and go, holy shit, this thing's never going to stop evolving, and hopefully I can keep on doing most of the new stuff. And we're all limited by size, flexibility, strength, time, natural inclination as to what aspect of the sport we're going to get good at, what aspects of the sport we're going to keep up with, and what aspects of the sport we're just going to kind of understand maybe that they're out there, but I need to triage this, right? There's a concept of triage where you just focus on not every emergency in front of you. You're just going to focus on a few of the biggest emergencies in front of you. So, or even you work on an area for a while, and then you go away from it, and then you come back to it, and you go, well, either I've forgotten a whole bunch of stuff, or I've now realized how much more there was to learn in that area. So my first instructional was an omoplata instructional, but I've gotten considerably better at the omoplata since that instructional. And if I keep on training for another 20 years, there'll be another one that will hopefully have more information again, or taught in a better way, perhaps.
Ongoing and continuous evolution. A moment ago, you mentioned as instructors, as influencers, as the ones who motivate and inspire others, we have to continue evolving. We have to continue learning and, continue growing with this very rapidly growing sport or art. How, when you step back from all of this, decades of experience, decades of exposure to a variety of different arts, especially jiu-jitsu, how do you see the growth of instruction itself? And I find you one of the better instructors out there, phenomenal way of relaying that information that's in your mind, verbalizing it out and showing it. And that's a skill on its own. When you step back, how do you see the evolution of instruction over the last few decades?
It's definitely improved. It's uneven, but ultimately especially something like YouTube is kind of a Darwinian arena. If you're teaching terribly, then people are not going to click, like, and share. Now, there are other factors that influence that as well, because there are ways to hack the algorithm. People buy views, people buy people pay money to get distribution. Your other things that you do outside of just teaching jiu-jitsu may make you more or less popular within the sport. I mean, if some very minor guy producing half-decent instructional videos all of a sudden ended up on, I don't know, a reality TV show and choked somebody out, obviously they would rocket fame, not because their instruction was any better, but because they got popular. But as a whole, when you said to zoom out, I think it really has improved. I think the focus on conceptually base, the conceptual basis behind jiu-jitsu is one such example. An understanding of what is a frame, what is a lever, what are universal ways to increase the amount of pressure that you put on somebody. What is the role of posture? What is the role of kazushi, of breaking somebody's base
Balance.
posture structure before you attack, as opposed to just throwing an attack out there? How to present information, the same information in different ways, because maybe you are going to respond to do this, do that, do this, and do that. Maybe somebody else is going to respond to here's why you do this, here's why you do that, and somebody else is going to respond to seeing it performed solo without a partner. Like, oh, that's how the hip moves. So I think more instructors are now showing the same thing from different points of view. And also it's a practice thing. When I take a look at my earliest instructionals that I put on YouTube were sold, I was coming from an academic background, right? I've got a couple of degrees in science, in biology. And it was almost like I was presenting a formal academic talk. Therefore, when you do this, it is very important. First do this, and then do that. And it's boring. Right? That didactic, pedantic approach is fundamentally boring. So how did I get better? Well, there's an ability to put out a great volume of stuff, and it's just like writing a book. To write a book, the first draft is going to be shit, the second draft is going to be shit, the third draft is going to be slightly better, but still shit. The book that's coming, that I'm publishing, that's going to be distributed by Simon Schuster in March of 2025, that's 12 drafts until it started looking pretty good. Now I'm working on the 13th draft with the editor from the publishing company. So just the sheer iteration, teaching more classes and then teaching to video, which is a different skill somewhat than teaching to a class. That helps, right? If somebody's put out 1,000 YouTube videos, is going to be better at teaching than somebody's put out one.
But also, in addition to all of this, is the simple acknowledgement that we want to grow, isn't it? I feel like there's many instructors out there who are unwilling to get better. They simply, perhaps from the success that they've achieved from a competition perspective, or perhaps just having a large following, they are just putting information out there. But sometimes we are unwilling to acknowledge that the method of teaching, our approach to the students or to the viewer, our even entertainment purpose, because would you agree that teaching in some way, it is a form of entertainment? And I don't mean funny, but from a stimulation perspective.
Sure.
Right? So like acknowledging these things. Right. Even in a class, like forget about YouTube, right? Like forget about the visual stimulation, but even in a class, if you are teaching, you need their attention. If they are yawning and falling asleep, how are you teaching them? Like
one of my heuristics for teaching at the fire department is if I can light something on fire during the demonstration, say we're talking about hazardous materials responses and the use of vapor suppressing foams to stop a gasoline spill, I could yabble on for a long time about the different properties of different kinds of foams and the different properties of different kinds of flammable liquids. But if I can yabble on for a few minutes and then go outside and light something on fire and say, this is what the fire looks like with foam, and let's add foam. Or this is what a fire looks like without an oxidizer, and now let's add an oxidizer. You have everyone's attention. So, yeah, that's really entertainment and it's a way to engage somebody. Jiu-jitsu is a little bit more complicated because what you might need to learn, you've got such a wide variety of physical skills and physical abilities, and I guess that's part of the art of being a teacher, especially in a class setting. You try and show something that's going to be useful to the guy who's 265 pounds fat and is 50 years old, and to the 18-year-old super athlete who joined the class.
Wait, I just want to make sure that I got this straight. You're not suggesting we should light something on fire during class to get the attention, right?
Well, you've now set me a challenge. I've got to figure out how to light something on fire during a jiu-jitsu instructional.
There you go. Yeah, when you do, just tag me and we'll continue the conversation there. But there is something to be said about being a good instructor, being entertaining, being engaging, and really providing the value to the student with the information that you're trying to project. And that's not an easy task, is it?
No, it's a skill. You said it. It's a skill that's separate from performance. Danny Nosanto, one of my mentors and huge influences, used to use the example of, would you rather learn boxing from Mike Tyson or Angelo Dundee or Customato, right? Like, you'd learn something sparring with Mike Tyson, but he's not. I've seen video of him trying to teach, and it's pretty bad. I mean, it's cool because it's Mike Tyson, and that's the only reason that you're watching it. His ability to convey information is very low.
Yeah.
It's interesting. His coaches were better at conveying information. So you don't want to necessarily train. Sometimes you get somebody who's a world champion and a good teacher, and that's rare. Maybe it's a bit more common in jiu-jitsu than in other sports, in part because there's not as much money in jiu-jitsu. Right? If you're a world-class tennis player, you win Wimbledon. Wimbledon is the tournament that I was looking for. You can probably ride off that. You don't need to be making instructionals to be funding your lifestyle. I don't know who would pay for a tennis instructional but I think the level of teaching is maybe a little bit higher in jiu-jitsu than in many other sports.
I like that. Stephan, we've been at this for an hour. Before we start wrapping this up, what we do at the end of every episode, we have a question for you from our previous guest. Now, he didn't know who's going to be answering that question, so think about a question completely in blind. Also, it always creates an interesting dynamic to the end of the show. In last episode, the question was asked, and we had it. How did you overcome the biggest hurdle when you got your black belt?
The biggest hurdle to getting your black belt, or the biggest hurdle after getting?
Well, we can go both directions.
Yeah.
I'll pick one.
Yeah. The biggest hurdle to getting a black belt is showing up and training consistently with focus. And the biggest hurdle is showing up regularly and training consistently with focus is injuries and not getting injured. So it's kind of a boring answer, but it is a contact sport. And anyone who becomes a black belt in jiu-jitsu is probably at least a purple belt in healing their body, or they're incredibly lucky. So learning to do risk-benefit analysis of different kinds of training. And this is continuing to be an issue as, I had a hip replacement. That has changed the way that I train. There's some things I don't do anymore. I would like to keep on doing jiu-jitsu into my 60s, 70s, and 80s. But that means I need to change how I do jiu-jitsu in my 50s so that I've got a body left to still
continue performing.
Still be able to train.
Yeah.
So that, I think the biggest hurdle to getting your black belt at a certain level is time management and injury prevention. The time management is really tricky sometimes. People's lives are so busy and there are so many distracting factors that that it's easy to get scattered all over the thing and to not have enough time to both train and to intelligently recuperate and to find low damage, high impact ways to train. And by impact, I mean, what are the things that you can do outside of training or outside of your regular training that'll have really big effects on the outcome for relatively low damage and relatively low risk?
At the same time, today it probably is much easier to train as far as accessibility, the amount of academies that are available. I mean, information online and so on. I'm pretty confident when you were, I can only speak for myself, but I had to drive an hour to the academy, and it was only open, 5 days a week for only 2 classes, and like there was not many choices. Today, this goes into what we talked about earlier, that I think a lot of students are spoiled in that sense, where they don't know how hard it was to train jiu-jitsu. Today, the accessibility to it is much, much easier. We just need to be smarter about this, right? Make some smart choices for ourselves.
I guess my question for the next guy.
Hold on, don't tell me now. Don't tell me now. We're gonna do this off air. Hold on.
Okay.
Don't tell me off air, because we cannot expose the question until next episode. Okay.
All right.
But this kind of brings us to the ending part of this conversation, and I always love to ask our guests before we depart this: where can people find you? If anybody has been living under the rock, because I think that's what it would take to not know who you are. But where can anybody find you? How they can guide into, your side of the world, online world? I think that's important. You've been making such a huge impact on the entire jiu-jitsu community. So if you guys have not been exposed to Stephan, where can I find you? Where they can find you?
My main site is grapplearts.com, and the thing on there that probably helped most people who are just starting is the book that I wrote and give away for free, A Roadmap for BJJ. It's kind of a guide to classical Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu positional framework, and why you should favor certain positions over others, and what you can do from one position, and kind of like how to get from the beginning to the end of classical Jiu-Jitsu. It changes a little bit once you throw the new leg lock meta into it, but one thing at a time. I've got other resources for the leg lock, the confusion of leg locks out there. So that's a roadmap for BJJ, and if you go to grapplearts.com/book, you can grab that. So that's a really good starting place for beginners and white belt and blue belt, I think. I've got thousands of articles on grapplearts.com, grapplearts.com/articles, I believe, where everything from conditioning to MMA to armbar escapes to podcast episode. There's a lot of material there. I've got the Strenuous Life Podcast, which is about 60 to 70% jiu-jitsu, and then 30 to 40% whatever the hell I feel like. So yeah, it's probably not the best for the algorithm, but hey, it's my podcast, and
it's your podcast. It's your show.
You can have all your money back. There's the BJJ Grapple Arts Master app, which is kind of a repository if you like your instructionals in app-based format. I've just spent a couple months revising that. That's how a lot of people really like to get their instructionals, but also there's DVDs and online streaming on Grapple Arts. I'm all over social media. Search my name, you'll find me. And, my publisher would kill me. If you're interested in entirely different application of martial arts, there'd be the book that I'm publishing next March, which is available for pre-order now. And pre-orders are super important. So if I've ever helped you through a YouTube video or an article or a podcast episode, consider picking up Perseverance, Life and Death in the Subarctic. It's a story of how I overcame being close to death from a kidney failure. I needed a kidney transplant. I didn't know how much function I'd regain. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to play with my kids. I didn't know if I'd be able to train on the mat. I didn't know if I'd be able to go into the outdoors. And kind of as a way to find out if I could, I did this 80,000 miles solo New Canadian Safari. So that's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo. Pre-ordering it would really help me. And what the offer that I've made, it's not going to be forever because I can't keep track of this forever. But if you pre-order that and you email me the receipt, a screenshot of the receipt, support@grapplearts.com, I'll give you my next instructional that I'm working on right now. I'm working on it right before we chatted for free. So that's going to be that offer's open up until that instruction comes out, and I've got to cut it off. Otherwise, I'll go out of my mind tracking all these things. Well, yeah, if you grab it and send me a screenshot of it, you'll get my next instruction for free.
I will make sure that all of this is in the show notes of this episode. So if you guys want to take advantage of some of those free things that Stephan is offering, feel free to do it. And obviously, if you like to connect with him, make sure you visit his website, visit his social media. What a great resource. And we all know that we need a lot of good resources in this craziness of mass of this jiu-jitsu journey that we are going through that continuously changes, continuously evolves. Stephan, thank you for being here. Thank you for hanging out with me, sharing your story, sharing your wisdom over the last hour. As I mentioned during the episode, I think you're one of those guys who really made a huge impact. And despite your humble approach to life, you are really impacting many out there. And I hope you continue doing this. We need more people like you. So I appreciate you being here.
Hopefully that impact is for the better. And thank you so much.
That's always the hope, right? All right, sweet. Let's wrap this up for today. Thanks for hanging out with me.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.